Hello and welcome to Aspiebloggen podcast, episode 4. I am your host, Tommy Eriksson. In today's episode I talk about how I feel there are never enough time to get things done and the upsides and downsides to having a Twitter account. This is a podcast where I bring you my views on things, in an attempt to let my voice be heard and to grow my confidence. For too long my voice has not been heard and my views are mostly unknown, but not anymore. Most of what I will bring up will be about Asperger and autism related stuff, but other stuff will most certainly be discussed. My website is at aspiebloggen.se. There you will find the show notes for each episode as well as my other blog posts. The blog itself is in Swedish, but this podcast and the corresponding show notes will always be in English. Now let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the letter B. First, I would like to apologize for not making a podcast last week. I have been preparing for a new hobby and that has meant a lot of reading. I spent so much time reading various websites about it that last week went by really fast, and normally I like to at least have some thought about what I will talk about in an episode before I start writing a script, and since I didn't have time for that, I opted to skip a week. But I won't do that again. Not doing an episode just made me question my ability to make podcasts, and that's not good. Also remember how I talked about getting on iTunes? Well, I kinda haven't gotten around to it. I was going to, but then ended up reading the options in PowerPress and realized that I have to write something good for the program subtitle and summary, and then panicked slightly, and then procrastination set in and I opted not to do it at that time, and then time just flew away. I'm good at not getting things done. But I really need to get on there and other directories, if only to get some stats. I tried getting stats from Libsyn, but that required a paid account, and I thought the same about Blueberry, but it turns out I just missed the options to activate it. Oops. Several weeks of possible downloads, yet no stats to show for it, other than AW stats, which I don't quite understand. Oh well. I will just have to admit that this site sucks. Hopefully I will have the energy to fix it, but until that happens I will just have to continue pumping out the weekly podcast and possibly a blog post every now and then. I will not, however, switch to more than one podcast a week or make it bi-weekly. That is just too complicated and not something I can manage. So let's finally talk about Twitter. For the last 2 weeks I spent reading up on the new crafts I will learn. I took somewhat of a hiatus from Twitter. What I noticed was that I could get a lot more done. If reading websites and creating a complicated spreadsheet about what to buy is what can be called getting things done. Twitter is my main way of keeping track of what goes on in Gamergate, so most tweets I get concern that. But then there are the ones about the manosphere. I read several blogs and one of them is Danger and Play by Mike Cernovic. I also subscribe to his Twitter. In fact, his tweets and retweets take up most of what I read there. I have recently come to the conclusion that I simply don't have the time to read his blog from the start. I've started reading, but doing it so meant ignoring all other newer stuff as well as his podcast. His podcast, by the way, is nice evidence that you don't need an intro and outro music to make a successful podcast. Just voice is enough. Although most time I have spent have been reading another blog called Return of Kings, which I mentioned in another podcast. The founder of it also founded a gaming blog called Reaxxion that I really like. That is the only gaming blog I really come up with, because I simply don't have the time to read more. There is only so much time I want to spend reading stuff online. And time does fly when you're reading blogs that are so frequently updated. I'm currently reading page 4 on Return of Kings, and that might be page 5 next time I start reading. I want to read this stuff, but time is so short. I wish I had spent more time last year reading that instead of spending so much time on Cracked or Kotaku in action on Reddit. I'm not saying Reddit is bad, I like Cracked, only that it updates far too often for my liking. That is why I stopped reading it. I could get most of the same news over Twitter instead, which meant much less time consumed. Granted, Twitter can most certainly be the same. I used to be of the opinion that if you tweet more than 10 times a day, then I will not follow you. Gamergate changed all that. Now I am happy if some people tweet less than 10 times an hour. I have unfollowed people I like due to this. Yet I only follow 15 people, one of which is Landy Finlay, currently sailing on an asteroid, and a few others are accounts that haven't been active for a long time. Yet there are people out there who follow hundreds or thousands of people. How on earth do they do it? They must be constantly glued to their screens, and if they aren't, then they must be missing a lot of tweets. If they are, then why even bother subscribing to so many people, and how do they determine what to read and what to skip? I just don't get it. And pardon me what's to quit Twitter. I get too much content that way. Too many links in articles I want to read, which means that I must skip reading other things. I used to read Brexit.com news and techniquebricks.com. Those blogs are about Lego. I stopped reading for a while due to lack of interest. I used to hold off for a few weeks at a time, and then because Gamergate made me not have time to read them. Now I haven't read them since about July, and if I did read them, I will feel stressed about not reading other stuff. My days are like, let's read this, and then let's read that, and oh, look at the time, it's bedtime. The next morning I'm like, okay, should I read that? No, wait, I read some of that yesterday, so let's look at this instead since there's something new, and repeat. Add to that the irritating inability of Polly, the Twitter client I currently use, to start again after being shut down. There are only so many times I want to re-authenticate that program after each reboot before I get tired of it. I used to use another program called Turpial, which apparently is named after some bird from South America. But it stopped working for a while due to Twitter switching API, and now I think that the interface is just too clunky compared to Polly. That is too bad, because I tried running Turpial today for the first time in about a month, and it started nicely without reading a re-authentication. Maybe I should try to find some other Twitter client with a small footprint. Many programs take up too many resources. That is why I like these two. They don't do that. While making the script for this episode, I came to a conclusion. I will stop reading Twitter, at least for a while. I read a blog called the Ralph Retort, and that will just have to be my main way to get Gamergate related news. The other blogs will have some more, and that will have to be enough. Hopefully by doing this and avoiding old posts from the previously mentioned blogs, I can catch up and perhaps get back to Twitter in a few months. I was going to talk about how Twitter was going to be my way of getting more social, but I now realized that I don't have the time nor energy to make that happen, so for now I will stay away. I don't even have time to comment on the blogs I read. By the way, please note that every time I make a post or podcast, there will be a tweet sent out. Right now I don't feel like going through the trouble of deactivating that feature, just in case I decide to come back to Twitter. But please don't respond over Twitter, I won't see it. Instead, comment on my blog over at aspiebloggen.se. The show notes / script for this episode will be over at aspiebloggen.se/4. And that will have to be all for this week. Until next time, take care.